The blood-red sunset painted the dusty streets of Caldwell, Texas, as Katherine Larson clutched the foreclosure notice with trembling hands. Her late husband's debts had finally caught up with her, and tomorrow, everything would be gone. The year was 1878, and in this unforgiving frontier town, a widow without means was as good as condemned. Katherine had buried Thomas 6 months ago, his body riddled with consumption that took him slowly, painfully. What she hadn't known was the mountain of debt he'd accumulated at Harrington's General Store, the saloon, and worst of all, with Edmund Blake, the ruthless businessman who owned half the county. The drought had destroyed their small farm, and Thomas had borrowed heavily, hoping for rain that never came. Now, at 26, Katherine stood on the porch of the cabin she would soon lose, watching the horizon as if salvation might appear there. Her dark hair whipped around her face in the evening breeze, her blue eyes brimming with unshed tears. Pride had kept her from begging, but pride wouldn't keep a roof over her head. Mrs. Larson. The voice startled her, and she turned to find Blake's right-hand man, a narrow-faced fellow named Silas, standing at her gate. "Mr. Blake requires your presence tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock sharp." She squared her shoulders. "I'll be there." After Silas departed, Katherine slumped against the doorframe. Everyone in Caldwell knew what happened to those who couldn't pay Blake. The men were run out of town if they were lucky, beaten if they weren't. The women. Well, Katherine had heard whispers about the brothel in the next county over. Her stomach turned at the thought. Sleep eluded her that night as she packed her few treasured possessions, her mother's silver hairbrush, her wedding band, a Dagria type of Thomas, before the illness had hollowed him. By dawn, she was dressed in her best, a navy blue dress with only slightly frayed cuffs, and had pinned her hair neatly beneath her bonnet. If she was to face ruin, she would do so with dignity. Edmund Blake's office occupied the top floor of Caldwell's bank building, a testament to his power in this dusty corner of Texas. Katherine climbed the stairs with leaden feet, each step bringing her closer to whatever humiliation awaited. "Ah, Mrs. Larson," Blake greeted her, not bothering to stand when she entered. His corpulent figure strained against an expensive waistcoat, and his fingers were adorned with gold rings. "Punctual, I appreciate that in a debtor, Mr. Blake." She remained standing, unwilling to sit without invitation. "Your husband left you in quite a predicament, didn't he?" Blake smiled thinly. $243, a substantial sum. Katherine swallowed hard. It might as well have been 2,000, an impossible amount. "I'll need time to—" "Time is a luxury you don't have," Blake interrupted. "However, I'm not without mercy. I've arranged an alternative." Her blood ran cold. "What sort of alternative?" Blake leaned back in his chair, studying her with cold eyes. "You're a comely woman, Mrs. Larson. Young, healthy. There are men who would pay well for such qualities in a wife. You mean to sell me?" The words barely escaped her constricted throat. "I prefer to think of it as arranging a marriage of convenience." Blake's smile never reached his eyes. "Your debt will be cleared, and you'll have a roof over your head. Many widows would consider it providence." Katherine's hands clenched into fists. "And if I refuse? Then you'll be out of your home by sundown, with nowhere to go and a debt you can't pay." The law is quite clear on what happens next. He didn't need to elaborate. Debtor's prison was a fate worse than death. "Who?" she managed to ask, bile rising in her throat. Blake reached for a piece of paper. "I've had interest from several parties. There's Jenkins, the blacksmith widower, 3 young children. Or perhaps Wilcox from the sawmill. Older but established." Katherine felt the room spin. This couldn't be happening. In the civilized East, such arrangements would be unthinkable, but here in Caldwell, where survival often trumped propriety, she had no recourse. "I'll give you until noon to consider your options," Blake said, dismissing her with a wave. "Choose wisely, Mrs. Larson." She stumbled out of his office and down the stairs, desperate for air. The morning sun blinded her as she emerged onto Main Street, tears threatening to spill. What choice did she have? Become some stranger's wife, his property, in truth, or face destitution and worse? Lost in her despair, she didn't notice the rider until his horse nearly trampled her. The animal reared and strong hands steadied her shoulders as she stumbled back. "Whoa there, madam." The man's voice was deep, tinged with concern. "Are you all right?" Katherine looked up into the face of a stranger son, bronzed and weathered, with kind green eyes that contrasted sharply with his otherwise rugged appearance. He wasn't from Caldwell. She would have remembered him. Yes, thank you. I wasn't watching where I was going." She tried to compose herself, aware that her distress was plainly visible. No harm done. He tipped his hat, revealing a shock of sandy brown hair. "Name's Grant Ingram, just rode into town." "Katherine Larson," she replied automatically, then glanced anxiously toward Blake's office. "I should go." Grant's eyes followed her gaze, his expression shifting. "You got business with Blake." Something in his tone gave her pause. "You know him?" "Let's just say we've crossed paths." Grant dismounted, tying his horse to the hitching post. "And I know trouble when I see it walking out of his office." Katherine hesitated. This man was a stranger, but there was something trustworthy about his direct gaze, the way he stood solid, unimposing despite his considerable height. "It's nothing I can't handle," she lied, unwilling to share her humiliation with a stranger, no matter how kind his eyes. Grant studied her for a long moment. "There's coffee at the hotel that doesn't taste like saddle leather. Would you care to join me? Seems like you could use a moment to catch your breath." The unexpected kindness nearly broke her composure. Katherine found herself nodding before she could think better of it. What did it matter now? By noon, her fate would be sealed. The hotel's small dining room was nearly empty at this hour. Grant ordered coffee for them both, then waited patiently as Katherine gathered her thoughts. "I'm a widow," she found herself saying. "My husband left debts I didn't know about." Grant nodded, unsurprised. "And Blake holds the note." "Yes, I have until noon to." She couldn't bring herself to finish. "To what, Mrs. Larson?" His voice was gentle but firm. The coffee arrived, providing a momentary reprieve. Katherine stared into the dark liquid, finding her reflection distorted and small. "To choose a husband," she finally said, the words bitter on her tongue. "Mr. Blake has arranged for my sale to settle the debt." Grant's expression darkened, a muscle twitching in his jaw. "That's not legal." "Perhaps not in civilized places," Katherine said with a hollow laugh. "But here, I have no family, no funds. What choice do I have?" Grant was silent for a long moment, contemplating his coffee. Then, with deliberate calm, he reached into his vest pocket and extracted a small leather pouch. He emptied its contents onto the table, gold coins that gleamed in the morning light. "How much does Blake say you owe?" Katherine stared at the gold, uncomprehending. $243, but I can't accept. Consider it a loan." Grant's voice was matter of fact. "I've been looking to invest in some property around these parts. Your farm sounds like it might suit." "It's barely a farm anymore," Katherine protested. "The drought, I've got experience with difficult land. Texas isn't known for being gentle." His smile was reassuring. "We can discuss terms later, once you're free of Blake's clutches." Katherine's head spun with confusion and desperate hope. "Why would you help a stranger this way?" Grant's expression sobered. "Let's just say I've seen what men like Blake do to folks who can't fight back. Besides, no one should be sold to clear a debt. That's not how things ought to work, not even out here." She wanted to refuse, to maintain what little dignity she had left, but the alternative loomed too dark, too final. "I couldn't repay you anytime soon. Like I said, we'll work out terms." Grant gathered the coins back into the pouch. "For now, let's go settle with Blake before he finds some other scheme." Katherine felt as if she were dreaming as they walked back to the bank building. Grant's steady presence beside her was the only thing that seemed real. When they re-entered Blake's office, the businessman's surprise was evident. "Mrs. Larson, I wasn't expecting you back so soon." His gaze shifted to Grant, narrowing with recognition. "Ingram, Blake." Grant's voice was cool, controlled. "I understand Mrs. Larson has an outstanding debt." Blake's eyes darted between them. "This is a private matter." "Not anymore." Grant placed the pouch on the desk with a solid thunk. $250, that should cover her debt with interest." Blake's face flushed with anger. "Now see here, Ingram, the debt is paid," Grant interrupted. "Mrs. Larson is free of any obligation to you. I want a receipt stating such, and I want it now." Something unspoken passed between the two men, a history Katherine couldn't decipher but could certainly sense. Blake's expression suggested he wanted to refuse, but after a tense moment he reached for his ledger. "Very well." He scrawled something on a piece of paper and thrust it at Katherine. "Consider your husband's debt settled. The property, however, is now mine," Grant finished. "I'll be visiting the land office next. I assume you have no objection." Blake's lips compressed into a thin line. "None whatsoever." Outside, Katherine felt lightheaded with relief and confusion. "I don't understand what just happened. Do you and Mr. Blake know each other?" Grant's expression was unreadable. "We have history, yes, but that's a tale for another time." He looked down at her, his features softening. "What matters is that you're free now. No one's going to sell you to clear a debt." "But I now owe that debt to you," she pointed out. "You owe me nothing but the truth, Mrs. Larson." Grant's gaze held her steadily. "Is your farm worth saving? Do you want to stay in Caldwell?" Katherine thought of the small cabin, the parched fields that had once, in better years, yielded enough to live on. It was the only home she had known since her marriage at 18. "It could be good land again, with water and work," she said honestly. "And I have nowhere else to go." Grant nodded as if coming to a decision. "Then we'll make it work. I'm handy with a well drill, and I know something about dry country farming." "Why?" Katherine asked, bewildered by his generosity. "Why help me this way?" For the first time, Grant looked almost uncomfortable. "Let's just say I believe in fighting wrongs where I find them. And what Blake was trying to do to you was wrong." It wasn't the whole truth, Katherine could sense that, but it was enough for now. She had been granted a reprieve, and whatever Grant Ingram's reasons, she was grateful. "Thank you," she said simply. "I don't know how I'll repay you, but I will." Grant's smile returned, warm and reassuring. "Like I said, Mrs. Larson, you owe me nothing but honesty. The rest we'll figure out as we go." As they walked toward the land office, Katherine felt something she hadn't experienced in months: hope. It was fragile, uncertain, but it was there, as real as the man walking beside her, whose presence had somehow turned the darkest day of her life into one of unexpected possibility. The days that followed were a whirlwind for Katherine. After securing the deed to her property, Grant had insisted on accompanying her back to the farm to assess what needed to be done. His expertise soon became evident. He examined the failed well, walked the boundaries of her land, and studied the soil with the practiced eye of someone who understood the harsh realities of frontier farming. "The well's not deep enough," he declared on that first afternoon, kneeling beside the dry pit Thomas had dug 2 years prior. "There's water here, but you need to go deeper, past the limestone shelf." Katherine stood nearby, arms folded against the chill of uncertainty. Thomas tried, but he wasn't well enough toward the end. The drought had already taken hold by then. Grant nodded, compassion in his gaze. It's not his fault. It takes specialized equipment to drill through limestone. Equipment I happen to have. You're a well driller. Katherine asked, surprised. Among other things. Grant's smile was enigmatic. I've had a few professions in my time. Cowboy, cavalry scout, rancher. You pick up skills as you go. In the days that followed, Grant brought his equipment and began the laborious process of drilling a new well. Katherine watched in amazement as he worked tirelessly, explaining each step with patience when she asked questions. By the end of the first week, they had struck water clean, sweet, and plentiful. It's a miracle, Katherine whispered, cupping the first precious drops in her hands. Grant laughed, his face streaked with dirt and sweat. Not a miracle, Mrs. Larson, just science and a bit of elbow grease. With water secured, they turned to the cabin itself. Thomas's illness had prevented basic maintenance, and the roof leaked badly in several places. Grant set about repairs with the same quiet competence he'd shown with the well, while Katherine began clearing the overgrown garden patch. They fell into an unexpected rhythm, working side by side during daylight hours. In the evenings, Katherine cooked simple meals from her dwindling supplies, and they ate by lamplight, talking about the day's progress and plans for tomorrow. Grant slept in the barn, refusing Katherine's offer to use the small second room that had once been intended for children who never came. On the 10th day, Grant rode into town for supplies and returned with not only seeds and tools but also a wagon load of lumber. "What's all this for?" Katherine asked, surveying the bounty with wide eyes. "If we're going to make this farm productive again, we need proper outbuildings," Grant explained. "A chicken coop, a smokehouse, a better barn, and I thought you might like a proper front porch where you could sit in the evenings." Katherine was speechless. The improvements he suggested would cost far more than her original debt. I can't possibly repay all this." Grant's expression turned serious. "Mrs. Larson, Katherine, I think it's time we discuss terms. May I speak frankly?" Her heart skipped a beat, anxiety flooding back. What would he ask for in return? She nodded cautiously. "I told Blake you owe me nothing but honesty," Grant said, removing his hat and running a hand through his hair. "But the truth is, I came to Caldwell looking for a fresh start. I've been on my own a long while, and I'm tired of wandering." Katherine waited, uncertain where this was leading. "What I'm proposing is a partnership," he continued. "This land has potential, but it needs work I'm willing to put in. In exchange, I'd like a stake in the farm, a fair share of whatever we can make it produce." Relief washed over her. "A business arrangement, practical, sensible. That seems more than fair, considering your investment. There's more." Grant seemed uncharacteristically hesitant. "I'd need a place to stay, not the barn a proper room, and I'd want us to present a united front to the town. Caldwell's the type of place where a man and woman living on the same property without benefit of." He trailed off, but Katherine understood his meaning. Small towns had long memories and longer tongues. Already, she'd noticed curious glances when they'd ridden into town together for supplies. "What exactly are you proposing, Mr. Ingram?" Her voice was steadier than she felt. "A marriage of convenience," he said bluntly. "On paper only, of course. You'd maintain your independence, I wouldn't expect. That is, it would be a practical arrangement, for propriety's sake." Katherine stared at him, speechless. After escaping one forced marriage, was she now considering entering another willingly? Yet this was different. Grant had never treated her as property, had never made demands. He'd worked alongside her, respected her opinions about the farm, listened when she spoke. And there was no denying that without his help, she would have lost everything or worse. "You don't need to answer now," Grant added hastily. Take some time to, yes, Katherine interrupted, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. A partnership makes sense, and you're right about the town. Grant studied her face carefully. You're sure? I don't want you to feel coerced, especially after what Blake tried to do. This is different, Katherine said firmly. This is my choice. A practical arrangement between equals. Relief and something else flickered across Grant's features. Then we have an agreement. He extended his hand and Katherine shook it, feeling the calluses that spoke of his hard work on her behalf. There is one condition, she added, holding his gaze. Name it. I want to know who you really are, Grant Ingram. You and Blake recognized each other. You had gold coins ready to pay my debt. You have skills and equipment that most cowboys don't possess. I need to know what I'm agreeing to. Grant's expression sobered. For a long moment he was silent, considering her words. Finally he nodded. That's fair, let's sit down. It's not a short story. They settled on the rough-hewn bench outside the cabin, the setting sun painting the scrubby landscape in gold and amber. Grant stared into the distance, gathering his thoughts. I was a Union soldier during the war, he began. Cavalry. After Appomattox, I stayed on, serving at frontier outposts. That's where I first encountered Edmund Blake. Katherine listened intently as Grant described how Blake had been a civilian contractor, supplying goods to Army forts across the territory, goods that often turned out to be substandard or missing entirely. Grant had been tasked with investigating the discrepancies. I found evidence that Blake was skimming supplies meant for both soldiers and reservation Indians, Grant continued grimly. People died because of his greed, soldiers from disease in the winter when blankets and medicine went missing, Comanche children who starved when food rations disappeared. Katherine's hand flew to her mouth. How terrible! I brought charges, but Blake had friends in high places. He escaped prosecution, but his army contracts were terminated. He swore revenge. Grant's expression darkened with memory. A month later, my commanding officer was found dead, supposedly a suicide, but I never believed it. Then there was an attempt on my life. Blake tried to have you killed, Katherine whispered, horrified. I couldn't prove it, but yes, I believe so. I resigned my commission and headed west. For years, I moved around, working ranches, drilling wells, staying ahead of trouble. Then 6 months ago, I heard Blake had settled in Caldwell, getting rich by driving farmers and ranchers into debt during the drought. So you came here to confront him, Katherine concluded. Grant nodded. To expose him if I could find evidence of his schemes. I never expected to find someone like you in his clutches. His gaze softened. When you told me what he was planning, I knew I had to intervene, even if it meant revealing yourself to Blake. He already knew I was in the territory. It was just a matter of time before our paths crossed. Grant shrugged. At least this way, I could help someone he was trying to hurt. Katherine absorbed his story, understanding now the undercurrents she'd sensed. Are you still in danger from him? Blake's not the type to confront an enemy directly. He works through others in the shadows. Grant's expression was resolute. But I'm not running anymore. If he wants trouble, he'll find I'm ready. And now I'm entangled in your feud, Katherine said softly. You were already entangled the moment Blake set his sights on your property, Grant pointed out. At least now you're not facing him alone. Katherine considered this. Grant's revelation should have frightened her, perhaps even made her reconsider their arrangement. Instead, she found herself admiring his integrity, his willingness to stand against injustice even at personal cost. Thank you for telling me the truth, she said finally. It can't have been easy to share. You deserve to know what you're agreeing to, Grant replied simply. I understand if you want to reconsider. Katherine shook her head. No, A partnership against Blake seems even more necessary now. She offered a small smile. Besides, you've already improved this farm more in 10 days than Thomas and I managed in 2 years. I'd be a fool to send you away. Relief washed over Grant's features. Then we proceed as planned. Yes, Katherine confirmed. Though we should probably make it official sooner rather than later if we're to avoid gossip. The circuit judge passes through Caldwell next week, Grant suggested. We could speak to him then. And so, exactly 2 weeks after Blake had attempted to sell her to clear a debt, Katherine found herself standing before Judge Harmon in the small courthouse of Caldwell, speaking vows to a man she barely knew but had come to respect deeply. The ceremony was brief, practical, matching the arrangement itself. The only witnesses were Mrs. Henderson, the kindly widow who ran the town's small boarding house, and Mr. Peterson, the elderly clerk who recorded the marriage in the county ledger with shaky handwriting. "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Ingram," Judge Harmon pronounced when it was done, his tone suggesting he'd performed so many frontier marriages of convenience that he couldn't distinguish them from love matches anymore. As they left the courthouse, Katherine felt the curious stares of townspeople. No doubt rumors were already circulating about the widow Larson's hasty remarriage to the newcomer. Let them talk, she thought with newfound defiance. This was her choice, her chance at survival. Grant helped her into their wagon with formal courtesy. As they drove out of town, Katherine caught sight of Edmund Blake watching from the window of his office, his expression unreadable even at a distance. "He'll be planning something," she murmured, nodding toward the bank. Grant's hands tightened on the reins. "Let him plan. We'll be ready." They rode in companionable silence for a while, the rhythmic clop of the horses' hooves and the creak of the wagon wheels the only sounds. The Texas landscape stretched around them, brown and gold under the autumn sun, but Katherine could already envision the changes spring might bring with proper irrigation and care. "It's not how I imagined my life would go," she said finally, more to herself than to Grant. "Widowed at 26, remarried 2 weeks later to a man I met because he nearly ran me down with his horse." Grant's laugh was unexpected and warm. "Life has a way of taking peculiar turns. 6 months ago, I was breaking horses on a ranch in Colorado with no intention of settling down anywhere, let alone getting married. And now," he glanced at her, his expression thoughtful, "now I'm thinking that maybe running isn't the answer. Maybe it's time to build something worth defending instead." As they approached their farm now, Katherine felt a curious mix of emotions. Apprehension, certainly, about the unconventional arrangement they'd entered. But also hope, stronger than before, that this partnership might grow into something stable and productive. What she didn't anticipate was how quickly the line between practical arrangement and genuine companionship would begin to blur. Over the next month, they settled into a routine that felt surprisingly natural. Grant moved his belongings into the small second bedroom, and true to his word, he treated Katherine with unfailing respect, never presuming intimacy or making demands. They worked side by side during the days, gradually transforming the neglected property into a functioning farm again. The new porch was completed first, and Katherine found herself spending evenings there, mending clothes or shelling peas while Grant carved intricate patterns into pieces of wood, a hobby he'd developed during long nights on the trail. He explained. "That's beautiful," Katherine remarked one evening, watching as a wooden bird took shape beneath his nimble fingers. "Where did you learn such craftsmanship?" Grant looked up, seeming almost embarrassed by her praise. "My father was a furniture maker back in Ohio before the war. He tried to teach me, but I was too restless in those days, always wanting to be outdoors. I only started carving again during the war to pass the time between battles." "What happened to your family?" Katherine asked, realizing how little she knew about his past beyond what pertained to Blake. Grant's knife stilled. "My father died at Antietam. My mother followed a year later. Grief, the doctor said, though I think it was more likely the consumption she'd been fighting for years. I had a younger sister, Emma, but lost track of her during the war. Last I heard, she'd married and moved to California." "I'm sorry," Katherine said softly. "It seems we've both known loss." Grant nodded, resuming his carving. "What about you? Any family left?" "None," Katherine admitted. "My parents died when I was 16. I had been working as a teacher's assistant when I met Thomas. He was passing through our town in Pennsylvania, looking for adventure in the West." She smiled at the memory. "He was so full of dreams about Texas, about building a homestead and raising a family. I was young enough to believe it would all unfold exactly as he described. And it didn't. The land was harsher than he expected. The first year wasn't bad. We had rain, managed a decent crop. But then the drought came, and Thomas's health began to fail. We kept hoping things would improve, but—" She trailed off, remembering the gradual decline, the helplessness she'd felt watching her husband wither away. "Hope is a powerful thing," Grant observed. "It can sustain you through impossible circumstances or blind you to hard truths." Katherine considered this. "I think Thomas knew toward the end that he'd made mistakes. The debts, the failing farm, he apologized so many times. It takes courage to pursue a dream," Grant said quietly, "even if it doesn't turn out as planned." Something in his tone made Katherine look up, meeting his gaze across the darkening porch. There was understanding there, and a warmth that had nothing to do with their practical arrangement. "Yes," she agreed softly, "it does." The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken possibilities. Then Grant cleared his throat and returned to his carving, and Katherine to her mending, but something had shifted, subtle as a change in the wind. That night, lying in her bed, Katherine found herself thinking not of Thomas and the past, but of Grant and the future. It was a disquieting realization that her thoughts of her convenient husband had begun to take on a decidedly inconvenient quality. The following weeks brought changes to the farm that would have seemed miraculous months before. With water flowing, Grant and Katherine prepared fields for winter wheat, a crop that could withstand the Texas climate better than the corn Thomas had unsuccessfully attempted. They built a chicken coop and purchased a dozen hens from a neighboring farm, ensuring a steady supply of eggs. Grant also invested in 2 milk cows and a small herd of hardy longhorns that could graze on the scrubby grass of the uncultivated portions of their land. "Diversification," he explained. "So we're not dependent on just one crop or animal." Katherine absorbed his knowledge eagerly, grateful for his experience. In return, she taught him what she knew about preserving food, making soap, and the 100 other household skills that made frontier life possible. They were true partners, each contributing essential knowledge to their shared enterprise. As autumn deepened toward winter, their visits to Caldwell became a regular occurrence, selling eggs and milk, purchasing necessities they couldn't produce themselves. Katherine noticed how Grant was always alert during these trips, his eyes scanning for trouble, particularly whenever Blake's name was mentioned. "He's been quiet," Grant observed after one such visit, as they drove home with their purchases. "Too quiet." "Perhaps he's decided we're not worth the trouble," Katherine suggested, though she didn't believe it herself. Grant shook his head. "Blake doesn't forget slights, and he considers you getting away from him a major one. He's planning something, I can feel it." His premonition proved correct sooner than either expected. 3 days later, they awoke to find their new well contaminated. Someone had dumped tar into it during the night. Blake, Grant said grimly, examining the damage. Or someone working for him. Katherine felt sick with dismay. The well had been their lifeline, the key to revitalizing the farm. Can it be cleaned? Grant's expression was grim. It'll take time and work. Meanwhile, we'll have to haul water from the creek for ourselves and the animals. It was the first of several incidents. A week later, their fence lines were cut, allowing their cattle to wander. After that, someone fired shots near their cabin in the middle of the night, not aimed to hit, but to frighten. Through it all, Grant remained resolute, repairing damage, strengthening defenses. He taught Katherine to shoot his spare revolver, insisting she practice until she could hit a target consistently. "I won't always be here to protect you," he explained, correcting her stance with gentle hands on her shoulders. "You need to be able to defend yourself." The casual touch sent an unexpected warmth through Katherine, distracting her from the target. She missed the shot entirely. "Sorry," she murmured, embarrassed by both the miss and her reaction. Grant stepped back, seeming to realize the effect of his proximity. "Try again," he encouraged, his voice gruffer than before. "Remember, smooth pressure on the trigger, don't jerk it." Katherine took a steadying breath and fired again, hitting the can he'd set up on the fence post. The small victory made her smile, and when she turned to Grant, she found him watching her with an expression that made her pulse quicken. "Good," he said simply, but his eyes conveyed more than the word itself. That night, Katherine lay awake longer than usual, her thoughts in turmoil. The practical arrangement she'd agreed to was becoming increasingly complicated by feelings she hadn't anticipated, feelings that made her both hopeful and terrified. Grant, too, seemed to be wrestling with similar conflicts. She noticed how he sometimes began to reach for her, then checked the gesture. How conversations would suddenly falter when their eyes met for too long. How he would find reasons to work in the fields rather than close to the house, as if proximity itself had become dangerous. The tension between them might have continued indefinitely had fate not intervened in the form of the season's first, nor there a fierce winter storm that swept down from the plains without warning, bringing freezing rain and howling winds that threatened to tear the roof from their cabin. They spent a frantic hour securing animals and equipment, racing against the rapidly dropping temperature. By the time they stumbled back into the cabin, they were both soaked through and shivering violently. "You need to get out of those wet clothes," Grant ordered through chattering teeth, moving to stoke the fire higher. "You'll catch your death otherwise." Katherine nodded, too cold to argue. She retreated behind the privacy screen in her room to change, but her fingers were so numb she struggled with the buttons of her dress. "Are you all right?" Grant called from the main room, concern evident in his voice. "My hands," Katherine admitted reluctantly. "I can't seem to," she broke off as Grant appeared at the edge of the screen, his expression a mixture of worry and uncertainty. He'd removed his wet shirt but still wore his sodden trousers. "Let me help," he offered quietly. Katherine hesitated only briefly before nodding. Grant stepped behind the screen, his movements careful, respectful. With gentle efficiency, he helped her with the stubborn buttons, then immediately stepped back. "I'll let you finish," he said, turning to go. "Grant." His name left her lips before she could reconsider. He paused, his back still to her. "Thank you for everything." He half turned, his profile illuminated by the flickering firelight from the main room. "You don't need to thank me, Katherine. I told you that I owe you nothing but honesty," she finished for him. "And honestly, I don't know what I would have done without you these past months." Grant turned fully then, his expression unguarded for perhaps the first time since she'd known him. The longing she saw there mirrored what she felt, a yearning that had grown beyond the boundaries of their practical arrangement. "Katherine," he began, his voice rough with emotion. "I never intended." The crash of breaking glass interrupted whatever he'd been about to say. Grant reacted instantly, pushing Katherine behind him as a flaming object sailed through their front window, landing on the wooden floor of the main room. "Fire!" Katherine gasped as the kerosene-soaked rag bundle ignited the rug. Grant moved swiftly, grabbing a blanket to smother the flames while Katherine hurried to finish dressing. By the time she emerged, he had extinguished the fire, but the acrid smell of smoke filled the cabin. "Blake," Grant growled, moving to the broken window with his revolver drawn. The storm had intensified, making it impossible to see more than a few feet beyond the glass. "They're gone," Katherine said, joining him at the window. "No one would stay out in this weather." Grant's expression was thunderous. "This has gone far enough. Using threats is one thing, putting you in danger is another." "Putting us in danger," Katherine corrected, placing a hand on his arm. "We're in this together, remember." The touch seemed to recall Grant to himself. He looked down at her hand on his arm, then met her gaze, the anger in his eyes softening into something more complex. "Together," he agreed quietly. "But when this storm passes, I'm going to have a reckoning with Blake. This ends now." The storm raged through the night, forcing them to move the mattress from Katherine's bed into the main room before the fire, as her bedroom ceiling began to leak. They sat side by side, wrapped in blankets, listening to the wind howl around the cabin's corners. "Will you tell me about Ohio?" Katherine asked, seeking distraction from both the storm and the unresolved tension between them. "What was it like growing up there?" Grant's features relaxed as he spoke of his childhood in a small town near Cleveland, of fishing in the summer, sledding in winter, his father's workshop filled with the scent of fresh-cut wood. Katherine found herself entranced not just by the stories, but by the man telling them, his usual reserve melting away as he recalled happier times. In turn, she shared memories of Pennsylvania, the small schoolhouse where she'd assisted, the apple orchards that bloomed each spring, the quiet life she'd led before Thomas had appeared with tales of Texas opportunity. "You regret coming west?" Grant asked, studying her face in the firelight. Katherine considered the question carefully. "Not exactly regret. I've lost much, but I've also gained things I couldn't have imagined. Understanding, strength." She met his gaze steadily. "New beginnings." Grant's hand found hers beneath the blankets, strong fingers intertwining with her own. "Katherine," he began hesitantly, "when I proposed this arrangement, I meant what I said about it being practical, about respecting your independence." "I know," she assured him. "But things have changed. At least, for me they have." His voice dropped lower, vulnerable in a way she'd never heard from him. "I find myself thinking of you not as a business partner or even just as a friend, but as what?" Katherine prompted when he faltered. Grant's eyes, reflecting the dancing firelight, held hers with unmistakable meaning. "As the woman I'm falling in love with." The admission hung in the air between them, more powerful than the storm raging outside. Katherine felt her heart race, torn between joy and fear, joy at hearing words she'd increasingly longed for, fear of opening herself to possible heartbreak again. "You don't have to say anything," Grant added quickly. "I understand if you don't feel the same. Our arrangement can continue as before." Katherine silenced him by leaning forward and pressing her lips to his, a gesture that conveyed what words could not. Grant froze for an instant, then responded with a tenderness that made her heart ache. When they finally parted, both breathless, his expression was a mixture of wonder and concern. "Are you sure?" he whispered, his hand coming up to cradle her cheek. "I'm sure," Katherine replied softly. I've been fighting these feelings, telling myself it was too soon after Thomas, that our marriage was just a practical solution. But the truth is, I've never felt with anyone what I feel when I'm with you." Grant's smile transformed his features, erasing the worry lines that had become so familiar. "I never expected this," he admitted. "When I came to Caldwell, I was focused on Blake, on exposing his schemes. Then I met you, and suddenly there was something more important than old vendettas. What happens now?" Katherine asked, acutely aware of how their relationship had fundamentally shifted in the space of moments. Grant's expression grew serious again. "First, we deal with Blake. As long as he's a threat, we can't truly move forward. And after," his eyes softened, "after we build the life we want. Together, as true partners in every sense." Katherine nodded, knowing he was right about Blake. The businessman's vendetta had escalated dangerously. Tonight's fire could easily have killed them both. Yet in this moment, sheltered from the storm, with Grant's hand warm in hers and the promise of a real future between them, even that threat seemed distant and surmountable. When Grant kissed her again, it was with a passion that spoke of long, restrained desire finally given freedom. Katherine responded in kind, all doubts swept away by the certainty that this man, this moment, this unexpected love was what she had been waiting for without knowing it. The storm finally broke near dawn, leaving behind a transformed landscape, trees stripped of leaves, fields glittering with frost, the world silent and new beneath a pale winter sun. They emerged from the cabin to survey the damage, which was mercifully minimal thanks to Grant's recent reinforcements to the roof and outbuildings. As they worked to repair what the storm had damaged, there was a new ease between them, a happiness that made even the most tedious tasks seem lighter. Yet beneath this newfound joy lay the knowledge that Blake's threat remained, casting a shadow over their future. "I'm going into town tomorrow," Grant announced as they finished their evening meal. "It's time Blake and I had a conversation that's been years coming." Katherine set down her cup, anxiety flooding back. "I'm coming with you." "Katherine, no," she interrupted firmly. "This involves both of us now. Blake threatened my home, our home. I won't stay behind while you confront him alone." Grant studied her resolute expression, then nodded slowly. "All right, but you'll stay out of harm's way if things turn ugly." "They won't," Katherine insisted, though she couldn't be certain. "Blake's a coward at heart. He works through others, like you said. Face to face, he'll back down." Grant didn't contradict her, but his eyes told a different story, one of a man who had seen enough of human nature to know that cornered rats often fought most viciously. They rode into Caldwell the next morning, the town quiet under the winter sun. A few people nodded greetings as they passed, but Katherine noticed how conversations hushed when they drew near. Word of last night's attack had clearly spread. Blake's office was empty when they arrived, the clerk informing them nervously that Mr. Blake was at home with a cold. "Been laid up since yesterday's storm," the young man added, not quite meeting their eyes. "Then we'll call it his home," Grant decided, his tone brooking no argument. Blake's residence stood apart from the main town, a substantial two-story house with a wraparound porch and ornate trim that seemed out of place in the frontier setting, like Blake himself. A sign of his aspirations, Katherine thought as they approached. Grant knocked firmly. After a long moment, the door opened to reveal Blake himself, wrapped in a brocade dressing gown, his complexion flushed with what might have been fever or fury at their appearance. "Ingram," he spat. "And Mrs. Larson, or I suppose it's Mrs. Ingram now. To what do I owe this unwelcome intrusion?" "You know exactly why we're here," Grant replied coldly. "Last night's attack could have killed us both." Blake's eyes widened with what appeared to be genuine confusion. "Attack? What are you talking about? The firebomb thrown through our window during the storm, Katherine clarified, studying his reaction carefully. Blake's confusion gave way to a sly smile. How unfortunate. But surely you're not suggesting I had anything to do with such lawlessness. I've been ill for days, ask anyone. A convenient alibi, Grant observed. But we both know you rarely do your own dirty work. Blake's smile vanished. You're trespassing, Ingram. I suggest you leave before I call the sheriff. By all means, call him, Grant challenged. I'd be happy to discuss your history of fraud, intimidation, and now attempted murder with the authorities. A flicker of unease crossed Blake's features before he masked it with disdain. You have no proof of anything. Don't I? Grant reached into his coat and withdrew a folded document. This affidavit from Captain James Warren details your theft of Army supplies. I've had it for years, waiting for the right moment. There are others' testimonies from those you've cheated and threatened right here in Caldwell. Blake's face paled beneath its feverish flush. Lies, all of it. The truth, Grant corrected grimly. And more than enough to see you ruined, if not imprisoned. A tense silence followed, Blake's gaze darting between them and the document in Grant's hand. Katherine could almost see the calculations happening behind his eyes, weighing options, seeking escape. What do you want? Blake finally asked, his voice tight with suppressed rage. For you to leave Caldwell, Grant answered simply. Sell your businesses, your property, all of it, be gone within 30 days. Blake barked a harsh laugh. You're insane. This town is mine. Then prepare for everyone to know exactly what kind of man owns it. Grant's voice was implacable. Every scheme, every debt you've manipulated, every family you've ruined, all of it public knowledge. How long do you think you'll last after that? Something ugly flashed in Blake's eyes, a hatred so pure it momentarily robbed him of speech. Then, with visible effort, he composed himself. You've always been self-righteous, Ingram, even back in the territory. Blake's tone was conversational now, almost pleasant. Did you tell your new bride about the men who died because of your high principles? The Comanche who raided that settlement after you insisted their rations be delivered properly. 6 settlers dead, including 2 children, all because you couldn't look the other way. Katherine felt Grant stiffen beside her. That blood is on your hands, Blake, not mine. You're the one who shorted their supplies for months, driving them to desperation. Details. Blake waved dismissively. The point is, your moral crusades have consequences. Are you prepared for them now? His gaze shifted to Katherine. Are you, Mrs. Ingram? Is that a threat? Katherine asked steadily, refusing to be intimidated. Blake's smile was cold. Merely an observation. Caldwell is my town. People here know where their interests lie. Cross me and you'll find no friends, no business, no peace. We're not afraid of you, Katherine declared, her hand finding Grant's. Together, we can withstand whatever you try to do. Blake's gaze fixed on their joined hands, his expression darkening. How touching. The widow and the wanderer, united against the big bad wolf. His voice dripped with mockery. Enjoy your happiness while it lasts. 30 days, you say. We'll see who remains in Caldwell when those 30 days are up. He stepped back, preparing to close the door, but Grant moved swiftly, blocking it with his boot. One last thing, Grant said, his voice dangerously soft. If anything at all happens to Katherine or our property, these documents go straight to the federal marshal in Austin. No warnings, no negotiations. Is that clear? Blake's jaw worked silently before he nodded once sharply. Grant removed his foot, and the door slammed shut with enough force to rattle the windows. They rode home in tense silence, both processing the confrontation. It wasn't until they were back at their farm, sitting before the fire with cups of coffee, that Katherine voiced her fears. You think he'll leave? Grant considered the question carefully. Blake's a survivor above all else. If he believes exposure would hurt him more than starting over somewhere new, he'll go. And if he doesn't, then we fight, Grant said simply. Not with violence, but with truth. We show Caldwell exactly who he is and what he's done. Katherine nodded, drawing strength from Grant's resolve. We should prepare either way. If Blake retaliates, we'll be ready, Grant assured her, taking her hand. But I don't want to spend tonight talking about Blake, not after what we discovered during the storm. His change of subject brought a flush to Katherine's cheeks as memories of their kisses, their confessions, rushed back. No, she agreed softly. Neither do I. Grant's fingers traced delicate patterns on her palm, sending shivers up her arm. I meant what I said, Katherine. I'm falling in love with you. Not because of our arrangement, not because of circumstances, but because of who you are, your strength, your kindness, your determination. Katherine's heart swelled with emotion. And I with you. When Thomas died, I thought that part of my life was over, that survival was all I could hope for. Then you came, and gradually, without my noticing at first, you brought back color to a world that had gone gray. Grant raised her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. I want to court you properly, he said, surprising her. Our marriage may have started as a practical arrangement, but I want to earn the right to be your husband in every sense. The tenderness of his declaration moved Katherine deeply. In a world where practicality often trumped sentiment, especially on the frontier, Grant's desire to honor her feelings, to build something genuine between them, spoke volumes about his character. I'd like that, she whispered. The days that followed took on a curious, magical quality. Despite the looming threat from Blake, despite the winter chill that settled over their farm, Katherine and Grant found joy in the simple act of getting to know each other as more than partners in survival. Grant brought her wildflowers he discovered on his rides, carved her small wooden treasures, a delicate rose, a tiny horse, a perfect miniature of their cabin. Katherine sewed him a new shirt from fabric she'd been saving, cooked his favorite meals, read aloud from her small collection of books in the evenings. They shared stories of their pasts, dreams for their future, building a foundation of understanding and trust that transcended their original agreement. And always, there were the touches, fingers brushing as they passed tools, a hand at the small of her back as they walked, embraces that grew longer and more passionate as their comfort with each other deepened. 2 weeks after their confrontation with Blake, they received unexpected visitors, Sheriff Taylor and Reverend Wilson, riding up to their farm one clear morning. Mr. Ingram, Mrs. Ingram, the sheriff greeted them, his expression grave. May we have a word? Katherine exchanged a worried glance with Grant as they invited the men inside. Had Blake made some move against them? Was this the retaliation they'd been braced for? Coffee, she offered as the men settled at their small table. Thank you, madam, Reverend Wilson accepted with a nod. Once the coffee was poured and they were all seated, the sheriff cleared his throat. I understand you had words with Edmund Blake a fortnight ago, he began without preamble. Grant nodded cautiously. We did. About certain allegations of misconduct on his part. Yes, Grant confirmed, his posture tense. I have documentation of Blake's fraudulent activities both here and in the territories. The sheriff and Reverend exchanged glances. We'd be interested in seeing that documentation, the sheriff said carefully. Seems Mr. Blake has decided to sell his holdings and leave Caldwell rather abruptly. Folks are wondering why. Katherine's eyes widened in surprise. He's actually leaving, Reverend Wilson nodded. Announced it yesterday. All his properties to be auctioned next week, including the bank. Says he's headed to California for his health. His health, Grant repeated skeptically. That's his story, the sheriff agreed with a wry smile. But there's talk. People wondering if there's more to it, especially those who have had difficulties with Blake's business practices. Katherine understood the implication. Others had suffered as she had pushed into debt, perhaps threatened or coerced. With Blake's hasty departure, questions were naturally arising. If there have been improprieties, Reverend Wilson added, his tone measured, the town deserves to know. Foreclosure, if nothing else. Grant studied the two men thoughtfully. Why come to us? Blake has his share of enemies in Caldwell. Because you're the ones who confronted him, the sheriff answered bluntly. And because there are rumors about your history with him, Ingram, something from your Army days. Grant's jaw tightened, but he nodded slowly. I'll show you what I have. It's not pretty, but it's the truth. For the next hour, Grant laid out the evidence he'd accumulated against Blake, the affidavits, the ledgers showing discrepancies, the pattern of fraud and intimidation that stretched back years. The sheriff and Reverend listened intently, occasionally asking questions but mostly absorbing the extent of Blake's corruption. This is disturbing, Reverend Wilson said finally, setting aside the documents with a troubled expression. To think such a man has been at the heart of our community. What will happen now? Katherine asked. Will charges be filed? Sheriff Taylor sighed, rubbing his mustache. That's complicated. Some of these matters fall under federal jurisdiction, not local, and with Blake leaving. You'd rather let him go than deal with the scandal, Grant concluded, a hint of the old bitterness in his voice. No, the sheriff corrected firmly. But I need to consider what's best for Caldwell. A drawn-out legal battle that might never reach conclusion, or a clean break that allows folks to recover from whatever harm Blake's done them. There's also the matter of the bank, Reverend Wilson added. If Blake is imprisoned, what happens to people's savings? The loans that keep farms and businesses running. Katherine understood their dilemma. Justice was rarely simple, especially in frontier towns where institutions were fragile and interconnected. What if there was a way to ensure Blake never returns without necessarily pursuing charges? She suggested. The documentation stays with trusted parties as insurance. The men considered this. That might be workable, the sheriff allowed, especially if those who have been wronged can be made whole somehow. The bank auction, Grant said suddenly. Who's likely to bid? Reverend Wilson shrugged. Hard to say. Blake's asking price is high. Might be no one in Caldwell can afford it. What if the town owned it? Katherine proposed, an idea taking shape. If everyone pooled resources, formed some kind of cooperative. The notion hung in the air, radical but not impossible. Farmer cooperatives existed elsewhere. Why not extend the concept to banking? It would take organization, the sheriff mused. Leadership. His gaze settled meaningfully on Grant, who shook his head. I'm no banker. But you understand finance clearly. Reverend Wilson gestured to the meticulous documentation Grant had compiled. And people would trust you, knowing you stood up to Blake. We'll need to discuss this, Katherine interjected, seeing Grant's discomfort. It's a significant decision. The men nodded, understanding. Of course, the sheriff agreed, rising. But don't wait too long, the auction's in 5 days. After they departed, Katherine found Grant on the porch, staring out at their land, his expression troubled. You don't want to be involved, she observed, joining him. Grant sighed heavily. It's not that simple. I came to Caldwell to expose Blake, not to take his place in the community. I'm not a settler by nature, Katherine. The admission sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the winter air. What are you saying? He turned to her, his eyes conflicted. I'm saying I've spent years moving from place to place. The idea of being responsible for a town's financial well-being, it's foreign to me. But our farm, Katherine pressed, heart pounding. "Our partnership, was that also temporary in your mind?" "No," Grant said firmly, taking her hands. "That's different. That's us, building something together. But this what the sheriff and reverend were suggesting, it's politics, community leadership. I've avoided those entanglements for good reason." Katherine squeezed his hands, understanding his hesitation but also seeing the opportunity that lay before them. "Grant, what Blake did to me, he did to others. If we can help make that right, don't we have a responsibility to try? By running a bank." Grant's skepticism was evident. "By being part of the solution," Katherine clarified. "It doesn't have to be just us. A true cooperative would involve many people, each contributing what they know. Your financial understanding, my teaching background for record keeping, others with their own skills." Grant was quiet for a long moment, considering. "You really want to put down roots here?" In Caldwell, the question carried weight beyond the immediate discussion of the bank. It was about their future, about permanence versus transience. "I do," Katherine answered honestly. "Not because it's perfect, it isn't, but because it could be home, our home if we choose to make it so." Grant's expression softened as he gazed at her. "You make me want things I never thought I'd have, Katherine. Stability, community, a life beyond just surviving. Is that so terrible?" She asked gently. His laugh was soft, rueful. "Terrifying, actually, but also right somehow." He drew her closer. "If we do this, if we help with this cooperative idea, we do it together, equal partners like everything else." Katherine's heart swelled with love for this complicated, honorable man who was gradually finding his way toward permanence, toward home. "Together," she agreed, sealing the promise with a kiss that spoke of their deepening bond. The days leading up to the auction were a whirlwind of activity. Word spread quickly about the cooperative idea, and meetings were held in the church to discuss logistics. To Katherine's surprise, interest was strong. Blake's departure had emboldened those who had suffered under his predatory practices to come forward, creating a groundswell of determination to ensure no one like him controlled Caldwell's finances again. Grant, initially reluctant, found himself drawn into planning sessions, his knowledge of financial documentation proving invaluable. Katherine watched with pride as he gradually embraced the role of advisor, careful not to dominate but offering insights that helped shape the cooperative structure. By auction day, they had raised enough for a competitive bid on the bank through small contributions from nearly every household in Caldwell. The atmosphere in town was electric with possibility as citizens gathered outside the courthouse where the auction would be held. Blake himself was conspicuously absent, having departed for California 2 days prior, but his lawyer conducted the proceedings with cool efficiency. When the bank came up for auction, Grant stepped forward as the cooperative's representative. $5,000, he declared, his voice carrying across the hushed crowd. The lawyer looked surprised clearly. He'd expected individual bidders with lesser means. $5,000 from Mr. Ingram. Do I hear 5,500? A tense moment passed. Katherine held her breath, scanning the crowd for any competing bidders. There was movement at the back, a well-dressed stranger conferring with a local man Katherine recognized as one of Blake's former associates. 6,000, the stranger called, stepping forward. Murmurs rippled through the gathering. Grant's jaw tightened, but he nodded calmly. 6,500, the stranger smiled thinly. 7,000. Katherine felt her heart sink. They had stretched to raise 5,000. 7 was beyond their reach. She saw the same realization in Grant's eyes as he glanced toward the committee members who stood nearby. Reverend Wilson stepped forward, speaking quietly to Grant. After a brief consultation, Grant squared his shoulders. "The Caldwell Cooperative respectfully withdraws from bidding," he announced. "We cannot match $7,000. The stranger's smile widened into something triumphant, and Katherine suddenly understood this was Blake's final move, sending a proxy to ensure his former nemesis didn't claim his prized possession. But before the auctioneer could bring down his gavel, another voice rang out from the crowd. "I'll add $3,000 to the cooperative's bid." All heads turned to see Mrs. Henderson, the boarding house owner, step forward, her chin held high. "Mabel, you can't afford," someone began. "It's not my money," Mrs. Henderson interrupted. "It's Agnes Blake's." The name sent a shock through the assembly. Agnes Blake, Edmund's wife, who had died under mysterious circumstances 3 years prior. "Edmund Blake stole my sister's inheritance," Mrs. Henderson continued, her voice steady despite the emotion clearly driving her words. "I've been gathering evidence for years. This money rightfully belongs to her daughter, my niece, who Edmund sent away to boarding school to keep her from asking questions." She approached Grant and Katherine, extending an envelope. "There's $8,000 here. Use it to secure the bank for honest folks." Grant accepted the envelope with solemn respect. $8,500 for the Caldwell Cooperative," he announced, turning back to the auctioneer. Blake's proxy looked shaken but rallied quickly. $9,000. Mrs. Henderson's expression hardened. "There's $10,000 total in that envelope, Mr. Ingram. Use it all if you must. My niece Caroline would want her mother's money to undo some of Edmund's harm." $10,000, Grant declared without hesitation. This time, the proxy conferred frantically with his local associate before shaking his head in defeat. The gavel fell with a decisive crack, and just like that, the Caldwell Cooperative Bank became a reality. Cheers erupted through the crowd as people surged forward to congratulate Grant, Katherine, and the committee members. Mrs. Henderson found herself surrounded by well-wishers, many learning for the first time of her connection to the Blake family and her quiet crusade for justice. "You did it," Katherine whispered to Grant amid the celebration, her heart full of pride and love. Grant's arm circled her waist, drawing her close. "We did it," he corrected, his eyes warm with affection. "All of us together." In the weeks that followed, the cooperative took shape. A board was elected, with Grant reluctantly accepting a position as financial advisor and Katherine serving as record keeper. Mrs. Henderson's niece Caroline was contacted at her boarding school in St. Louis and invited to come to Caldwell once the term ended, to take her rightful place in the community her mother had been part of. As winter gave way to early spring, life at their farm settled into a rhythm of purpose and contentment. The fields greened with winter wheat, the cattle grew sleek, and the chickens laid prolifically. Each week, they traveled to town for cooperative meetings, gradually becoming integral parts of Caldwell society. One evening in late March, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Grant took Katherine's hand, his expression uncharacteristically nervous. "I've been thinking," he began, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "A dangerous pastime," Katherine teased gently. His smile was quick, but soon gave way to seriousness again. "When we married, it was a practical arrangement, a partnership for survival." Katherine's heart quickened. "Yes, though it's become much more." "It has," Grant agreed, his voice deepening with emotion. "And that's what I've been thinking about. Our marriage began on paper, but now—" He hesitated, seeming to search for the right words. "Now," Katherine prompted, hardly daring to breathe. "Now I want to make it real in every way," Grant said simply. "I love you, Katherine, not as a business partner or a friend, but as the woman I want to share my life with completely, if you'll have me." The tenderness in his expression, the vulnerability of his request, moved Katherine beyond words. This strong, principled man who had saved her from Blake's schemes, who had helped rebuild her farm and her hope, was now offering his heart without reservation. "I will," she whispered, tears of joy pricking her eyes. "I love you too, Grant. I think I have since that first day when you nearly ran me down with your horse." Grant laughed, the sound rich with happiness. "Not my finest moment." "I disagree," Katherine countered, reaching up to touch his face. "It was the moment everything changed." His kiss was gentle at first, then deepened with the passion they'd both kept carefully contained during their courtship. When they finally parted, breathless and flushed, Grant's eyes held a question. "Are you sure?" he asked softly, echoing the words he'd spoken during the storm when they'd first confessed their feelings. Katherine's answer was to stand and take his hand, leading him toward the cabin door. "I've never been more certain of anything," she assured him, her heart full of love for this man who had asked for nothing but offered everything. That night, beneath the Texas stars, their marriage truly began not as a practical arrangement or a business partnership, but as a union of two hearts that had found each other against all odds, in the most unexpected of circumstances. The years that followed brought challenges and joys in equal measure. The Caldwell Cooperative Bank thrived under community ownership, helping local farmers and businesses weather the region's unpredictable economy. Grant's expertise and Katherine's organizational skills proved invaluable, earning them the respect of even those who had initially doubted their intentions. Their farm prospered too, expanding gradually as they acquired adjacent land that had been foreclosed by Blake. Rather than holding it for profit, they divided it into manageable parcels, selling it at fair prices to families seeking a fresh start much as they themselves had found. In the spring of 1880, their family grew with the birth of Thomas James Ingram, named for Katherine's first husband and Grant's father. The boy had his mother's blue eyes and his father's determined chin, a perfect blend of them both. Grant took to fatherhood with unexpected ease, carving wooden toys and spending hours showing his son the wonders of their land. 2 years later, Elizabeth Ann joined the family, her arrival coinciding with the completion of Caldwell's new schoolhouse, a project Katherine had championed and would eventually teach in once the children were old enough. Caroline Blake, Mrs. Henderson's niece, became a frequent visitor to their farm after settling in Caldwell. The young woman bore a striking resemblance to her mother, but possessed a strength of character that allowed her to overcome the shadow of her father's reputation. Under Katherine's mentorship, she eventually took a position at the cooperative bank, using her inheritance to establish a fund for widows and orphans in need. Edmund Blake himself never returned to Caldwell. Rumors occasionally reached them of his activities in California, each less successful than the last. When news came of his death in 1885, reportedly penniless and alone, Grant received it with somber reflection rather than satisfaction. "It's a hard thing," he told Katherine that evening as they sat on their porch, now expanded to wrap around the enlarged cabin. "To have spent so much of my life focused on bringing him to justice, only to find that justice arrived on its own terms." Katherine squeezed his hand, understanding. "You did bring justice, just not the kind you initially imagined. Look around you at our town, our farm, our family. All of this exists because you chose to fight Blake's cruelty with kindness, his greed with generosity." Grant's gaze swept over their property, the flourishing fields, the sturdy barn, the children playing in the yard supervised by Caroline, who had come for Sunday dinner. "I never imagined this life," he admitted. "When I rode into Caldwell that day, I was still the wanderer, the man with a grudge but no roots." "And now," Katherine asked, though she knew the answer, Grant pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Now I'm home, truly home in a way I haven't been since before the war." As twilight settled over their land, Katherine reflected on the strange, winding path that had brought them to this moment. What had begun with Blake's cruel attempt to sell her to clear a debt had transformed into a love story she could never have anticipated, one built on respect, partnership, and a shared vision of what life could be. "You ever regret it?" Grant asked suddenly, as if reading her thoughts. "Marrying me under those circumstances?" Katherine turned in his arms to face him, taking in the features that had become as familiar to her as her own, the laugh lines around his eyes, the slight gray now threading through his sandy hair, the steadfast warmth of his gaze. "Never," she answered truthfully. "How could I regret the best decision I ever made?" Grant's smile, still capable of making her heart race after all these years, was answer enough. Together, they watched as stars appeared in the Texas sky, each one a testament to possibilities neither had dared dream of on that fateful day when a widow's debt had led to a love beyond price. "You owe me nothing but love," Grant had told her then, not knowing how prophetic those words would prove, for love, freely given and joyfully returned, had become the foundation of everything they'd built together, a debt that grew richer with each passing day, never to be repaid but always to be cherished.